Born from one of Zeus's many affairs, this demigod was destined to have a challenging life, overcoming numerous assassination attempts from his stepmother and surpassing the now iconic 12 labours. This beefcake went on to become one of the most famous heroes from Greek mythology, even starring in multiple films based on his adventures, before eventually losing his life by the hand of a jealous lover. Hello and welcome to Pantheon Mythology. In today's video, we'll be exploring the life and adventures of Heracles, also known as Hercules to the uncultured masses. But if you're here, that clearly doesn't apply to you, and I love you very much. Also, just a reminder that we publish most godlike content on a weekly basis, so if mythology is your thing, smash that like button and subscribe if you're new here. Our story begins in ancient Greece, more precisely in the city of Thebes, where Zeus, king of the gods, caught a glimpse of a beautiful woman, Alcmene. Despite being a married man, Zeus was a dirty dog and no stranger to his bit on the side. However, Alcmene loved her husband and was faithful to him, which was problematic for the Greek womanizer. With that in mind, Zeus turned to Apate, a personification of deception and fraud, and with her help disguised himself as Amphitryon, husband of Alcmene, before seducing the unknowing lady with his smoothest moves. From there, some extreme bedroom action happened for a night, which was in fact 3 days, as Zeus had forbidden the sun god Helios to rise until he had finished. 3 days? Blimey, that's just 1 day short of my own personal record. 9 months later, Heracles was born. Some versions of the tale say he had a twin brother known as Iphicles. But either way, it was crystal clear that young H was a special specimen. Despite being fathered by the king of the gods, Heracles was to be raised by his mother as a mortal. Yet one day, as a baby, he would display his godlike capabilities, coming face to face with 2 snakes sent to kill him. Taking a serpent in each hand, he choked the life out of each one, much to the displeasure of the onlooking Hera, wife of Zeus, who hated him so. But why the hatred? Zeus had fathered other children outside of wedlock. Well, Hera was jealous of Heracles and sought to kill him because Zeus had promised that the child of Alcmene would become the ruler of Greece. Zeus, though, would ensure that his son would grow to become the strongest of all men and an iconic hero of Greece. As an adult man, Heracles was a delight for the eyes. Men wanted to be him, and women wanted to be with him. Fathers would throw their daughters at him, knowing that powerful grandchildren would be produced. However, Heracles chose Megara, the daughter of King Creon of Thebes, and was known for her breathtaking beauty and virtue. The lovebirds would go on to have 3 sons together, and it was here, at their happiest, where jealous Hera would strike again with a plan so horrific, so disgusting, you can't help but shake your head and go, bloody hell, that's dark. With the assistance of Apate, Hera cast a fit of madness onto her bastard stepson, and under the influence of this rage, slaughtered his children and his wife. When he regained his senses and realized what he had done, he was overcome with grief and guilt. Other stories describe how he spared Megara, and it was her piercing screams of horror that brought him back to reality. While still alive, Hera had claimed her first victory against a man she despised so much, taking away all that he loved so dearly, and by his own hand too. As punishment for his sin, Heracles was deported to Argos. That's the Greek city, not the depressing retailer found in the UK. It is here he was bound to the service of King Eurystheus, who, under the guidance of Hera, would task our hero with 12 deadly labours, on the belief that Heracles would succumb to one of them and finally lose his life. The 12 Labours of Heracles. 1. The Nemean lion. The Nemean lion was a monstrous beast with impenetrable golden fur that terrorized the countryside around Nemea. In order to complete this labor, Heracles had to find a way to kill the lion without being able to pierce its skin with weapons. No problem, as Heracles, thanks to his guns of steel, eventually killed the big cat by strangling it with his bare hands. Following his victory, Heracles skinned it and wore its hide as a cloak, which made him invulnerable to weapons. The Nemean lion became one of Heracles' symbols, and he is often depicted wearing its skin as a cloak or carrying its head as a trophy. 2. The Lernaean hydra. The Lernaean hydra was a serpent-like monster in Greek mythology that had 9 heads, one of which was immortal. It lived in the swamps near the town of Lerna. Its venom was so deadly that it could kill a person with just 1 drop. When Heracles confronted the monster, it breathed poison at him and tried to wrap itself around him. Heracles was able to cut off each of the hydra's heads, but for every one he cut off, 2 more would grow in its place. To overcome this problem, Heracles enlisted the help of his nephew, Iolaus, who cauterized the stump of each head as it was cut off to prevent new ones from growing. Genius, eh? Eventually, Heracles was able to kill the hydra by cutting off its immortal head and burying it beneath a rock. The hydra's venomous blood was also used by Heracles as a weapon, as he would dip his arrows in it, spawning the birth of the poison arrow. 3. The Ceryneian hind. A deer in Greek mythology that was known for its golden antlers and hooves of bronze. In order to complete this labor, Heracles had to capture the hind alive. The hind was sacred to the goddess Artemis, and it was said to be able to run faster than an arrow and be able to outrun any pursuer. Heracles chased the hind for an entire year before finally capturing it. According to one version of the myth, he was able to catch the bugger by using his immense strength to hurl a boulder at it and knocking it unconscious. In another version, he was able to capture the hind by outwitting it and using his ingenuity to create a trap. After capturing the hind, Heracles brought it back to King Eurystheus, who released it back into the wild as a sign of respect for Artemis. What an absolute waste of time. 4. The Erymanthian boar. The Erymanthian boar was a wild boar that lived in the region of Erymanthus, which was located in the western part of the Peloponnese in ancient Greece. The boar was a fierce and dangerous beast that terrorized the countryside, destroying crops and attacking those damn tourists and livestock. Rather than kill the thing, like the previous labor, Heracles was tasked with capturing the Erymanthian boar alive and bringing it back to his master, King Eurystheus. Heracles traveled to Erymanthus and tracked down the boar, eventually cornering it in a thicket. Despite the boar's fierce resistance, Heracles managed to capture it and bring it back to King Eurystheus, who was so terrified of the beast that he hid in a large jar while Heracles presented it to him. You could say it was a jarring experience. 5. The Augean stables. Get the face masks, rubber gloves, Mr. Muscle, and plenty of sick bags, because the Augean stables were a group of stables that housed the 3,000 cattle of King Augeas of Elis. The stables had not been cleaned in over 30 years, and they were filled with an enormous amount of excrement. Tasked with cleaning the Augean stables, Heracles came up with a plan to clean the stables in just 1 day. Using his massive biceps, he diverted the course of 2 rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, so that they flowed through the stables. The rushing waters of the rivers were able to wash away all of the excrement and clean the stables in a matter of hours. What's a little water pollution anyway? After completing this labor, Heracles was rewarded with 1/10 of the cattle as payment for his services. That's dinner sorted for a while then. 6. The Stymphalian birds. The Stymphalian birds were a group of man-eating birds with bronze beaks and metallic feathers that lived in the region of Stymphalia in ancient Greece. They were considered a formidable and dangerous threat, as they would attack and kill humans who ventured too close to their nesting grounds. The Greek hero was tasked with slaying the Stymphalian birds, and to do this he used a set of castanets given to him by the goddess Athena, which made a loud noise which scared the birds out of their nests. Heracles then shot them down with his arrows, possibly his previously created poison arrows, who knows. After completing this labour, Heracles returned the castanets to Athena, who placed them in the sky as the constellation Corvus, the crow. 7. The Cretan bull. The Cretan bull was a wild and ferocious bull that lived on the island of Crete in ancient Greece. Offspring of the sea god Poseidon and the nymph Europa, those crazy genetics, right? It was known for its strength and ferocity, and was said to be nearly impossible to capture or tame. As his seventh labour, Heracles was tasked with capturing the Cretan bull alive and bringing it to King Eurystheus. Heracles travelled to Crete and tracked down the bull, eventually cornering it in a ravine. Despite the bull's fierce resistance, Heracles managed to capture it and bring it back to his bossman, who was so terrified of the beast he refused to accept it and ordered Heracles to release it back into the wild. Clearly, the king wasn't feeling too bullish about the whole situation. 8. The Mares of Diomedes. The Mares of Diomedes were a group of wild and ferocious horses that lived on the island of Thracian Dia, also known as Diomedes' Isle. The mares were the offspring of the god Ares and were known for their violent and uncontrollable nature. They were kept in a stable by the monster Diomedes, who fed them on human flesh. Heracles was tasked with stealing the mares of Diomedes. He travelled to Thracian Dia and confronted Diomedes, who tried to attack him with his sword. Heracles managed to overpower the monster and take control of the mares, which he brought back to King Eurystheus as proof of his labour. 9. The Girdle of Hippolyta. The Girdle of Hippolyta was a magical belt that belonged to Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. A gift from the god of war Ares, it was imbued with great power and was said to have the ability to protect its wearer from harm. It was greatly prized by the Amazons as a symbol of their strength and independence. I'm sure you've guessed by now that Heracles was tasked with obtaining the Girdle of Hippolyta. He travelled to the land of the Amazons and asked to borrow the girdle, but Hippolyta and her fellow Amazons refused to part with it. In the ensuing struggle, Heracles managed to defeat the Amazons and take the girdle by force, killing Hippolyta before delivering the belt to Admete, daughter of King Eurystheus. 10. The Cattle of Geryon. A fearsome monster who lived on the island of Erythea in the far western reaches of the known world. He was said to have 3 bodies joined together at the waist, with each body having a separate head, and was known for his enormous herd of red cattle, which he guarded fiercely. Geryon was known for his great strength and bravery, and he was a formidable opponent in battle. However, he met his match when he encountered the Greek hero Heracles, who was tasked with stealing Geryon's cattle. Travelling to Erythea, Hercules encountered Geryon, who tried to defend his cattle wielding 3 shields, 3 spears, and wearing 3 helmets. Ultimately, Heracles was able to overpower the monster, killing him with a poisonous arrow and stealing the cattle, driving them back to King Eurystheus as proof of his labour, who sacrificed them to the mortal enemy of Heracles, Hera. Talk about a stab in the back. 11. The Apples of Hesperides. In this penultimate labour, Heracles was tasked with obtaining the apples of the Hesperides. a group of golden apples that grew in a garden on the island of Erythea, in the far western reaches of the known world. The garden was tended by the Hesperides, a group of nymphs who were daughters of the god Atlas. The apples were a gift from the goddess Gaia to the goddess Hera, and they were said to have the ability to grant immortality. Heracles travelled to the island of Erythea and encountered the Hesperides, who guarded the garden and the apples fiercely. It was here in the garden where he encountered Atlas, holding up the heaven on his shoulders. Using his immense charm, Heracles persuaded Atlas to get the 3 golden apples for him by offering to hold up the heavens in his place for a little while. While Atlas returned, he decided that he did not want to take the heavens back, and instead offered to deliver the apples himself. But Heracles tricked him by agreeing to remain in place of Atlas on the condition that Atlas relieve him temporarily while Heracles adjusted his cloak. Atlas agreed, but Heracles changed his own mind and walked away with the apples, taking them back to the king. 12. Cerberus. Cerberus was a 3-headed dog who belonged to the god of the underworld, Hades, and guarded the entrance to the underworld, preventing the dead from leaving and the living from entering. Heracles was tasked with capturing Cerberus and bringing him back to the mortal world. To do this, he travelled to the underworld to confront the fearsome beast. However, since the ghosts of the Nemean lion and hydra and Geryon had preceded Heracles, all the denizens of the underworld were terrified of him and fled at his approach. Not to be disheartened by this, he marched into the palace of Hades to see the mutt cowering behind his master. Hades agreed to hand over Cerberus on the condition that he could overpower the beast and turn it back to the underworld immediately. Despite its ferocious appearance and its ability to breathe fire, Heracles was able to overpower Cerberus and bring him back to the mortal world as proof of his labour. The king, as we know, wasn't the toughest soul, and Eurystheus begged Heracles to return Cerberus to the underworld, offering in return to release him from any further labours when Cerberus disappeared back to his master. Freedom! With his newfound freedom, Heracles became one of the most famous heroes in Greek mythology. He was celebrated for his strength, bravery, and cunning, and was admired by the people of ancient Greece for his many great deeds. He would unfortunately meet his end at the hands of his wife, Deianira. Deianira was a woman whom Heracles fell in love with and married. She was the daughter of Oeneus, the king of Calydon, and Heracles became enamored with her while she was visiting the kingdom. Deianira and Heracles had a tumultuous relationship, as was often the case with a hero's romantic relationships. Despite her love for Heracles, Deianira was frequently jealous of his many other lovers and mistresses, and she often worried that he would leave her for one of them. Like father, like son, eh? The end of our hero would come thanks to a centaur named Nessus, who tried to abduct Deianira while she was crossing a river. Heracles intervened and killed Nessus, but before he did, Nessus convinced Deianira to take some of his blood as a love potion, saying that it would ensure Heracles' faithfulness to her. The dastardly centaur had been up to no good though, and had mixed his blood potion with some of the venom from the poison arrow that Big H had used to kill him. Deianira, not knowing this, smeared the potion on a robe with the intention of securing her man forever. During their marriage, Heracles had fallen for Iole, daughter of Eurystheus, king of Collier, and in an act of desperation, Deianira, realizing that Iole was a dangerous rival, gave Heracles the poisoned garment to wear. When Heracles put on the tunic, his skin began to burn. The fabric stuck to him, like a cold beer sticks to my hand on a summer's day. Our hero was driven mad by the pain the poison caused, and with the last of his strength made his followers build a funeral pyre on Mount Oeta. As his skin burned to the bone, Heracles threw himself onto the pyre and had it lit, ending his suffering. Although he lived as a mortal, his legend was secured through the heroic acts he'd accomplished throughout his life. In death, it was clear that he was far more than a mortal, and he was welcomed onto Mount Olympus, with Hera eventually accepting this fate as long as Heracles would be the last of Zeus's sons to be granted this privilege. The stories of Heracles' adventures and his personal life continue to be an important part of Greek mythology to this day, and will likely live on for years to come. This is how we know that Heracles is a true icon of mythology. There we have it then. Heracles. What are your thoughts on this Greek hero? Is he in fact the most famous character from Greek mythology? Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you're new here. It really helps us out. Also, if you've made it this far, why not check out our clothing brand, Pantheon Apparel. We have clothing inspired by the deities and beasts from across the pantheons, including, of course, the star of today's video. We're rated excellent on Trustpilot and ship worldwide. You'll find a link in the description. If you'd like to carry on your adventures across the mythos, then why not check out what's on screen for you now. As always, thanks for watching. See you on the next one.